most people know that the bees are declining in numbers and are experiencing colony collapse disorder. Would you say this is coincidence, or is this a result of the use of glyphosate and GMOs and the rise in pesticide use?
No, there's a direct relationship here to colony collapse disorder. There are three characteristics of colony collapse disorder. One is that the bees are malnourished in two ways. One is that they're micronutrient deficient. They're not getting the micronutrients that they need for their metabolism. That'd be copper and manganese and zinc and cobalt and the other essential mineral nutrients, because the plants that are sprayed with glyphosate or that are growing in a GMO environment have much lower levels of those, so that the pollen isn't providing those micronutrients for the bees. The second characteristic is that the bees are starving to death, and yet in the hive there's plenty of honey and bee bread. But the antibiotic effect of glyphosate kills the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria that the bee has to have in the honey crop or the bee stomach in order to digest those foods. So that even though there's plenty of food available for it that's been collected, that honey contains glyphosate from the pollen that's been collected. Glyphosate systemic in the plant. It accumulates in the growth points and the reproductive structures. So those points, those parts of the plant that the bee is foraging on have a relatively high concentration of glyphosate, and its antibiotic effect destroys the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria species that the bee has to have. Now, we also have to have those organisms in our GI tract so that we can produce the aromatic amino acids, the tryptophan, the lysine, or the tyrosine, and the phenylalanine are critical amino acids that we can't produce ourselves. We rely on those same organisms. And then the third aspect of colony collapse disorder that comes in is the disruption of the endocrine hormone system, so that the bees never really learn how to forage efficiently. They also are in an emaciated state when they go out to forage and will lose their way back. They get disoriented. And then you combine glyphosate with the neonicotinoid insecticides, which are also very strong endocrine hormone disruptors, and you have two very powerful hormone disruptors there, so that the bee doesn't have a chance. So with glyphosate, you have all three of those factors that are involved. You have the reduced availability of micronutrients in the pollen and in their food source. You have a very powerful antibiotic that is destroying the gut microbiome, or the microbiome in the honey crop that's necessary to digest that food. And then you have a very strong endocrine hormone disrupting chemical that combines with other factors in the environment, such as the neonicotinoids, to have a devastating effect on our pollinators. Yes,
for years I had heard that it was the neonicotinoids produced by Bayer that were responsible for the decline in the bee populations, and it's only recently, listening to you, that I've realized that it's not simply the neonicotinoids, and perhaps it's glyphosate even more so.
Yes, glyphosate really impacts all three of those areas very dramatically. Certainly any one of them can have an impact, but when you combine all three of them, and then you combine with the neonicotinoid insecticides, you see a devastation that is just unbelievable far as 30 years ago.
Sure.